Hello, friends. It's Chapo. Just taking a broader view is there's obviously all these countries are very different. They face different challenges and circumstances that led to what you're describing as sort of like pink tide 2.0. It's like a number of these countries, like Colombia included, like which specifically recently would have been unthinkable, have elected left oriented or like semi socialist governments to varying degrees. But the left in Latin America has been the target of a more or less, regardless of like how different the countries may be, they've all been the target of a war directed at them by the United States. So like the extent to which they will be successful in forming a kind of new bloc to counter US hegemony or neoliberalism, like what do you see as the signs of like any possibility of a kind of a broader a block of countries that are united and forming a kind of united front, whether it's on like trade, energy, foreign policy, against their what was now decades of domination by the United States.
I think there's a historic opportunity. The US, certainly in the past, couple of decades, I think has never been weaker, not only in the region but at a global level. And now I think the biggest story in Latin America right now is the economic recovery in Venezuela. And now with the Russia and Ukraine war, the United States is having to come back to Venezuela and try. We'll see what happens, but to try and basically start buying that oil after having they themselves boycotted it and destroyed their oil industry for years with the sanctions, starting with Obama and intensifying under Trump. And, the tables are really turning in that aspect. And as I said, I think the biggest story right now coming from Latin America is the economic recovery of Venezuela. And it's key to the energy market. For the past 3 years, very quietly, Venezuela's been rebuilding its oil industry. Their oil industry was almost destroyed by US sanctions because a lot of their refineries, etc., was built around using sort of US technology. And with the sanctions, they weren't able to bring in repairs, etc. So the production of oil almost collapsed. And it was something imposed by the United States. The United States has told the world first you have to boycott Iranian oil, then you have to boycott Venezuelan oil, and now you have to boycott Russian oil. And people, countries like India and others, they got tired of this. They used to buy from all these countries, and now they don't have energy, and so that's why they're increasing their purchase from Russia. But Venezuela, for the past few years, has been rebuilding with investment from Iran. Iran has been the number one country that has rebuilt the Venezuelan oil industry. China and Russia have played a smaller role. China, as a consumer, is one of the only countries that was still buying Venezuelan oil when Europe and the United States were boycotting it. Russia with some sort of smaller investments, but Iran, the government of Iran, has been the one that has rebuilt the oil industry of Venezuela using Iranian technology, sort of adapting the infrastructure, the refineries with Iranian technology, so they're no longer dependent on the US. And now their production of oil is, even at the end of last year, was hitting 1 million barrels a day, which is close to the pre-sanctions level. So the supplies is coming back, and this can fill the hole which has been left by US sanctions on Russia. But of course, this is going to have to be quite humiliating climb down from the United States after having done everything to actively destroy the energy market at an international level and try to overthrow the Venezuelan government. But the Venezuelan government has withstood those bad years. 2018, 2019, economic situation was so dire in Venezuela, inflation running into the thousands of percent annually. But now what you see with the production of oil going back up, inflation is back into the single figures, monthly inflation back into single figures for the first time since sanctions began. They're no longer have the highest inflation in the region. Argentina now has a higher rate of inflation. The foreign investment is coming back to Venezuela. It's quite an unprecedented economic recovery. Even Credit Suisse released a report a few months ago, in January, predicting that there would be 15% growth in Venezuela's GDP in 2022. There's nowhere else in the world that's having that level of growth. So this
You've,
is
you've also you've also covered Bolivia as well. Their economy continues to grow, and also inflation is being kept down in Bolivia as well. How is
Bolivia
Arce
has the
managed to
lowest
do that?
inflation in the world. In 2021, the accumulated inflation was 0.51%. Um, and I think that Bolivia's there's a lot of interesting, innovative solutions coming out of Bolivia right now, which I think doesn't get enough attention, and which a lot of other countries could do. So when the Russia-Ukraine war started, obviously there's been this global shortage of grain, which need to make bread, etc. But Bolivia start, a policy going back many years, starting with Evo Morales in like 2008, 2009, was to stockpile grain, stockpile in these massive state-owned warehouses. And whenever the international price goes up, the government then releases some of these reserves, price goes back down. Just a couple of months ago, I remember the cattle ranchers wanted to raise the price of beef. The Bolivian government had its own stocks of beef, and they said, right, we're going to start selling it in the state-owned supermarkets at the original price. So what happens then is the free market price corrects itself. The private sector has to bring down the prices again because their competitors, the state, is selling at X price. These are the sorts of innovative ideas that I think could a lot of countries could be employing right now. The question of fertilizer, global fertilizer shortage. Russia and Ukraine are the number one producers of fertilizer internationally. Countries like Peru, like Brazil, and now have a total crisis in agriculture. They don't have enough fertilizer. But Bolivia doesn't. Bolivia has its state-owned fertilizer plant built in 2019 under Evo Morales. And if you can imagine this, it was actually closed by the right-wing coup government. They said it was, well, as part of their free market reforms, closing the state industries. If they would be in power now, Bolivian agriculture would be in crisis. But it's not. Now Bolivia is earning huge amounts from the price, going up like 10x since the Russia-Ukraine war started. And not only, and of course, the local producers have their supply guaranteed. And any country with natural gas can make fertilizer. Fertilizer is urea, ammonium is petrochemicals. Any country with gas, oil can do it. Brazil under Lula used to have its own state fertilizer plants, and it was of course closed after the coup in 2016. And now Brazil is having to import it from Bolivia and other countries. So uh, these are the free market has crumbled upon impact with first the pandemic and now the Russia-Ukraine war. Whereas countries with a strong state sector have been able to weather the storm a lot better, and Bolivia is the chief among them.
And I guess there's a immense opportunity right now, I guess is what you're saying, for a kind of an alliance or some sort of sort of independent bloc in Latin America of what would that kind of solidarity look like as a counter to like US hegemony in the region?
I think the most important question is energy sovereignty and the question of lithium. I think we're not quite there yet, though, because countries like Argentina, countries like Chile, don't have the same strength of their state sector, so it makes it more difficult to coordinate. That's what we need to bring back of the so-called old pink tide, where we had strong state industries that were coordinating with each other. That's what is missing at the moment with people like Petro, Boric, or Alberto Fernandez in Argentina, where they don't have the same focus on nationalization and state industries, because without that there can't be that level of coordination. You can't set the lithium price at an international level if the private sector is running it in two of the countries, because then the private sector, they're owned by God knows who. And so there is that weakness. But I think as I said, there's opportunity for Latin American integration. That's the most important thing. Integration without the United States. So organisms like CELAC, for example, which is groups together all of the Latin American countries in the Caribbean in a block without the presence of the United States. That's what UNASUR was. It was destroyed when sort of the last wave of governments came in. But that is the most important: is to have organisms for integration that don't include the United States and Canada, because obviously their interests are very, very different to the interests of Central, South America, and the Caribbean.
I guess just to wrap things up here, just from our perspective here in the states, like where obviously everyone is losing their mind because of gas prices and inflation, and from our conversation, like a solution to that, if you are Joe Biden, haha, or any nascent left wing movement in very wealthy developed capitalist countries, like sort of runs through this idea of state control and state development of natural resources, and like a large state sector for the economy to weather like the crises of capitalism that are happening right now.
Absolutely. And it's all about efficient management as well. Of course, it's all about efficient management. I mean, Bolivia is the number one example of how this has been able to work. There's a whole chain that goes into this. Even earlier today, I bought my honey at the state-owned supermarket. Bolivia has built a chain of supermarkets where they sell things, all over the country, not only in the cities but also rural areas. Things like rice, flour, and they through that they can keep the prices low and hedge against inflation. All of these are innovative ideas. I think subsidies incredibly important. Of course, is very costly, but I think sometimes when I read tweets by Joe Biden talking about like the gas companies need to stop with these rises, blah blah blah. Like it's
How
insanity.
about how
You
about
can
you just
stop them.
become a gas company?
Yeah, exactly. You can set the gas prices. A government can set the gas prices, and they can put in the investment that's necessary. That's what Bolivia is doing. That's what countries like Nicaragua is doing. The gas price haven't risen 1 cent since the Russia-Ukraine war, precisely because of this. So there's no other way other than. And as I said, the free market system has crumbled first with the pandemic and then with the Russia-Ukraine war. This is why we're seeing the election of these left-wing governments. Because if you remember what was going on in 2018, 2019, when Juan Guaido declared himself president of Venezuela, it felt like the right was just this all-powerful force in Latin America. They held pretty much every government in South America except for Bolivia until the coup, obviously. Um, there was this massive hegemonic bloc that was coordinating with the United States to isolate Venezuela. People like Mauricio Macri in Argentina, the guy Bolsonaro in Brazil, in Chile, in Peru, everywhere. And now all of those governments that seemed so powerful at the time all crumbled when the pandemic started because their system of extreme inequality, zero social safety net, of capital being owned by uh, either foreign companies or just like five families. All of that crumbled upon impact with the pandemic when people had to be locked in their homes and suddenly it was like, well, how am I going to feed myself? Most like 80% of people work in the informal economy. How are they going to feed themselves? No state support. All of that system came crashing down with a pandemic. And now it's got even more intense with the Russia-Ukraine war. But these governments like Petro in Colombia or Boric in Chile or Castillo in Peru, they're going to find the same problems with that the right wing governments had in the pandemic. They're going to have the same problems with the Russia-Ukraine war if they uh, if they don't embrace the old legacy of the state sector, of nationalization, of the government playing a coordinating role in the economy, which they haven't wanted to do, but they're going to have face the same problems if they don't do it now with the Russia-Ukraine war.
Ali Vargas, I think we should leave it there. I want to thank you so much for spending this time with us today. If people would like to find more of what I think is really indispensable reporting on Latin America and Bolivia in particular, where should they go?
No, thanks, Will, for having me on. Yeah, obviously, I'm the co-director of Calsacho News, which is the media outlet we run from here on Bolivia, covering Latin America. We've just launched our own podcast, actually, just a couple of weeks ago. We just today released our third episode with we interviewed Laureano Ortega, which is the son of the president of Nicaragua. Tomorrow we're going to be interviewing Andres Arauz, who was nearly the president of Ecuador.